Welcome to this second part of episode 39 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. This two-part episode of the podcast is dedicated to my cycle in the August of 2021 along the length of the Hebridean Way, the route that guides cyclists across the 10 main islands of the Outer Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland. Now, if you didn't listen to part one of this episode, you may want to pause here and go back to catch up. On the assumption that you have listened to part one, you'll remember that at the end of that podcast, I was approaching the ferry terminal on the island of Berneray, just to the north of North Uist. From there, I caught the ferry on a short journey to the town of Leverburgh on the island of Harris. At the start of this podcast, you find me on a beach about 20 kilometres north of Leverburgh as I contemplate the cycle through Harris and Lewis to my final destination at the lighthouse at the Butt of Lewis. There's two things that you can hear there. You can hear my footsteps along the beach here on the west coast of Harris, where I've camped overnight, and the lapping of the waves against the shore. And let me set the scene. It's still quite a cloudy day, although there are pockets of blue sky over to my left, which I think is the south. And then over to my right, the sun is just trying to peek its way out of the clouds. It appeared momentarily a few minutes ago and then disappeared again. Hopefully it will reappear at some point in the near future. Across the water I can see the mountains of Vatersay and this large bay in which I'm currently standing. Quite an idyllic scene. Very quiet on a Sunday morning at 8:30. Now, I need to go back to yesterday to fill you in on what happened after I last recorded something as I was cycling up through North Uist. North Uist being that place which really ticks all the boxes of the Outer Hebrides. It's what you expect. It's what your image of the Outer Hebrides actually is. Now, I wasn't sure as I was approaching the ferry, wasn't sure as to what to do once I arrived on Harris. The options were to try and find some accommodation in Leverburgh, which is where the ferry arrived. That was one possibility. I could set off on the east coast, the so-called Golden Road. I could set off up along the west coast, the place where all the famous beaches are, like the one I'm currently standing on. And I got chatting to a few people on the ferry, a few cyclists, and I don't know what one of them said, but I came to the conclusion that actually, with the weather being not brilliant yesterday, it was quite wet, certainly forecast for being wetter later in the day. There were no camping options, other than wild camping perhaps, on the south of Harris, so I decided to just knuckle down and cycle the 20 or so kilometres along the west coast, really concentrating on the cycling rather than admiring the views. And that's exactly what I did. And I came to this campsite at Horgabost, booked myself in, not just for one night, but for 2 nights. And the plan today is to, well, I did think I'd have to make a decision. Would it be the west coast? Would it be the east coast of Harris? But my plan is to actually leave most of my stuff in the tent on the campsite and go cycling all the way around the island. The island isn't really an island if you look at a map. I reckon that will be a cycle of probably 40, 50 kilometres, which, if the weather holds, should be a really amazing day of cycling, taking in the beaches of the west coast, which I've already seen to some extent, and that east coast Golden Road that everybody says is such a magical route. The only question I've got to decide upon now is to whether to go anti-clockwise or clockwise. Do I retrace my steps back down to Leverburgh and then head north along the east coast, or do I continue north along this west coast and then head back in the direction of the campsite from the north? So what's it going to be, anti-clockwise or clockwise? As I'm standing here, I'm tempted to say I'll head anti-clockwise, but that may change in the next half an hour as I decide exactly what I'm going to do. I'll leave you with the sounds, the soporific sounds of the beach and the waves lapping against the shore. Okay, I've decided to do it anti-clockwise, and there's a good reason for that. It will mean that I don't have to retrace my steps in the same direction, because if you remember yesterday, as I mentioned, I cycled up from Leverburgh clockwise, and then tomorrow morning I'll be continuing from Horgeboss, where the campsite is, up to Tarbert again clockwise. So if I do today's ride anti-clockwise, I'll be seeing everything from the opposite direction and never see the same view twice. That said, this is familiar territory, because I cycled down here yesterday, and again it's interesting because it's different from all the other islands. They really have got their own unique feeling, look, etc. Now the sense I get of Harris, this side of Harris, is that although there are a decent number of locals living here, lots of again little houses, there's probably an equal number of holiday lets, villas, some of them in quite stunning locations, and that might explain why I've got 4G signal from Vodafone. Obviously they're catering for the tourists, perhaps more than the locals, who knows. So it's a lot less busy in terms of buildings compared to the other islands. There's a lot less of the maca, or there seems to be. Perhaps that's the business of the sheep. Now to my right, I'm still not too far from Horgeboss, to my right I can see Vatersay, the island, made famous by the Castaway programme, of course. I don't know, I wouldn't mind being castaway on a place like that. I'm sure I'd survive. Certainly in August, perhaps not in the middle of January, February, but hey, if you started me off in July and August, I think I'd be okay for a few days, if not a few weeks. And I can see in front of me there's just the headland that I'm going to have to cycle round, which will take me back to Leverburgh. And then once in Leverburgh, I'll just have a quick look around Leverburgh. It's a Sunday, the Sabbath of course, which means that everything, or most things, I'm expecting to be closed, which may or may not be a problem. I forgot to bring any food with me, so maybe ravenous by the time I get back to the campsite, but I'm sure I'll survive on that score. And then once through Leverburgh, head down to the east coast and the Golden Road that so many people have told me so much about, and I've got high expectations. They say it's very, very different to what I'm experiencing now. This is beautiful, the beaches, the sloping green hills leading up to the, well, I can't see them because they're shrouded in the mist, the mountains beyond. So let's hope that the east coast is even better. Morning. Can you hear that? There are three things I can hear. The trickle of water in the stream to my left, some distant sheep, and a hum. And the hum, I think, is of insects. But apart from that, nothing. 100% natural sound. Now, this is a magical place. About 10 minutes ago, I turned right, where yesterday After coming off the ferry, I turned left and headed down the west coast. I've come back to the junction where you've got to decide left or right, and I've now passed that junction and I've turned right in effect, if I'd come off the ferry yesterday, and I am now on what's called the Golden Road. The Golden Road, people have told me it's because it was an extremely expensive road to build. But the first thing that you notice is it is so different from the wide open plain on the west coast of Harris. The first thing that happens after you leave the small settlement of Leverborough is that you get channelled up a hill, and the hills on both sides encroach to the point where you've got, at one point halfway up the hill, you've got a beautiful waterfall coming off the cliff to your left, and then the stream running down the hill to your right. And I've now reached the top of that hill, and in front of me I can see the hill descending, and it descends down to a place called Rodel, where there's a church, I think. Somebody told me about a church I've got to investigate, which I'll do. But the colours here are predominantly purple and dark green. The purple of the heather, and then the dark green of the grass on the hills. Again, it's interesting. These sheep have had a massive impact on this environment because there are very few flowers. I presume over the decades, probably centuries, they've just nibbled away to make it just the heather that survives. But even so, it's beautiful. If this is a taste of things to come over the next couple of hours, then whoa, I'm in for a treat. So next stop Rodel, where there's a church, and then turn left and head up to the coast. And I did wonder a few minutes ago whether the weather was turning for the worse. Put my rain jacket on. It's changed again, and I can see sun and blue skies again. Oh, this has turned into a very promising cycle. Are you a local here?
No, I'm just staying up the road.
Oh, right.
I only arrived yesterday, so I'm just finding my bearings.
Right, well, I've been promised great things about the Golden Road, so
Yeah.
I'm off to discover it.
Oh, fabulous. How far have you come from? Where are you?
Well, I'm cycling the Hebridean Way, so I've left
right.
all my stuff at the campsite on the other side of Harris.
Oh, nice.
And I'm just heading along here for today and then continuing my journey north tomorrow.
Oh, lovely.
So, but this is beautiful, isn't it?
It's absolutely stunning. And I think that the weather's supposed to improve, so
Yes.
with the sun out, it's just going to be amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, the weather for the rest of this week is looking pretty good, so
Yeah.
you've certainly chosen the right time.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Enjoy your trip. Thank you. That woman wasn't half wrong. The weather's really turned and it's, dare I say, hot. And I've just paused at Rodel at a church, and it's kind of a church that ticks every box that you want a church to look like. It's fairly small. It's kind of shaped in the form of a cross. It's got a nice square tower, and it's surrounded by a graveyard on the top of a hill with a nice curving pathway inside. And I just went inside a few minutes ago, and it's an echoey, historic place. It's the home of the MacLeods, or the burial place of the MacLeods. Nice little church, even for somebody who hasn't got a religious bone in their body. And the sun's come out. My goodness, might have to get the factor 30 on. This is like nothing I've experienced in Britain before. It is almost unearth-like, and you can understand why Stanley Kubrick used it to film 2001: A Space Odyssey for apparently Jupiter. It's about 50% rock, 50% vegetation. And if it weren't for the road or the electricity pylon to the left that strings its way along the coast, you could be on a different planet. Beautiful pools of water. The sun is now out and we've got mainly blue sky, and it is just bucolic. I'm just gazing at a pond reflecting the blue sky, the sea beyond, the vegetation and the rocks in between. It is a real struggle to keep cycling. I've stopped numerous times since that church. Numerous times to get the drone out to take photographs. A few minutes ago, I got to a little cove and I slowed down. And I thought, oh, that looks like a seal on a rock. Didn't really think it was. But I looked more carefully and it was. So I got the video camera out, took some shots. Then I noticed the second one. And then I noticed the whole group of seals basking on the rock just next to where I'd seen the first seal. Amazing. You can see why they call it the Golden Road. It is certainly gold standard in terms of what it gives you. Highly recommended. And the road itself, well, it twists and it turns. Long gone are those long straight roads of South Uist and North Uist that seem to go on endlessly. This, if you're a lover of corners and turns, is one hell of a road. It's a very thin road, lots of passing places, thank goodness. But then again, there's barely any other traffic. I think I've seen as many cyclists racing their way in the opposite direction as I have cars. And this is Sunday, obviously. I think people have taken that to heart and thought, well, I'm just staying put, I'm not going anywhere because everywhere's closed. Everywhere is closed, but you don't come to a place like this to go to one of the galleries, surely, or one of the twee little shops. You come just to stare at what is open 7 days a week, 24/7, 365 days a year, which is the landscape, the flora, the fauna. Those seals don't know it's the Sabbath, thank goodness. I've woken up on day 8 of this trip to the most beautiful sunrise on the Horgaboss campsite. You can't see it, of course, but it is stunning, and the location is stunning as well. You can hear the waves crashing on the beach gently. You might also be able to hear the neighbours snoring. What a great way to start the second week of this trip along the archipelago of the Outer Hebrides. Right, now, yesterday was fantastic. The loop circle around the island of Harris was just out of this world in terms of what it delivered, the scenery, the cycling, just beautiful, fantastic day cycling. Came back to the campsite, had a great big pile of pasta as a reward, but also in preparation for what I'm going to be doing today, because today, well, the end of yesterday's ride I had to come down quite a long hill, and I'm going to have to now go back up that hill this morning. Yesterday I just had one pannier with my cameras in. Today, going back up the hill, I'm going to have 4 panniers fully loaded. So that will be the challenge for later this morning. Well, I'll say later this morning, probably in a couple of hours once I've got packed up here, because I really would like to get a set off as soon as possible, because I would like to get to Callanish today, famous for its stones. Don't know where I'm going to stay tonight. Could be wild camping, could be elsewhere. Don't think there's a campsite up there. But if the weather's like this all day, then it should be a cracking day of cycling. I've just reclimbed the hill that I had to cycle down yesterday at the end of that loop around Harris. It seemed a lot longer on the way up than it did on the way down, but hey, I suppose that is normally the case when you're on a bike. Nice climb though, nice steady gradient, wasn't too strenuous, Goldilocks climbing, not too shallow, not too steep, just right. And well, I'm sitting on a rock at the top of that hill. You'll occasionally hear cars go up and down behind me. In fact, there was somebody just past me before I started recording this in a little Jeep, and the woman in the passenger seat had her camera held out of the window, presumably videoing or taking a picture of the view, and I thought, that's the advantage of being on a bike. You can just stop wherever you want. You don't have to feel that obligation to keep moving like people do in cars. You can just stop, pull your brakes on, and within seconds you can do what I'm doing now, which is just sitting in a rock and looking at the view over the ocean and over the mountains. Now, talking of which, up until now, really, there have been one or two hills like the one I've just climbed, but nothing too strenuous, nothing too big, nothing too steep. I've got a feeling that today there will be a steep climb. People have told me about it. It's the one from Tarbert that I've got to get over the mountains that I can see in front of me at the, well, is it the southern bit of Lewis, or is it the northern bit of Harris? Who knows? Somewhere the border is between Harris and Lewis. I have no idea where it is, whether it's at Tarbert or somewhere else. But those mountains I can see, they're fairly modest mountains. We're not talking the Alps here. But those are the ones I've got to climb. And I think I can see the route. I think I can see a route that's just winding its way first to the right and then to the left. And it does look fairly steep, actually. So that's what I've got to come over the course of the next few hours. I would imagine when I get to Tarbert, I'll pause just to stock up. Still got some food in the bag, but hey, I've run out of pesto, which is my kind of stock food to go with the pasta. So I'll try and buy some food. Might even buy some whiskey. I haven't had alcohol for 2-3 days. I might need some whiskey to celebrate with over the next few days if I get to the butt of Lewis. Let's hope I do. I've done it. I've climbed the hill that everybody had kept warning me about. I've been lucky because it's such a beautiful day and there's barely any wind, so that made life a lot easier. It was fairly steep at times and it was quite long, and when you get to the top, the highest point, in fact where I'm standing now, there are still yellow snow poles poking up on the left hand side of the road, which means that in winter, in order for the snowplows to get through, they need to be guided by the little yellow rods poking up above the snow. So it is pretty high. I think I've climbed to about 200 metres, 250 metres, something like that. Mountains all around. And in the bottom of the valley, well, it is a loch. Loch Seaforth it's called. And what I can see is just a little inlet into Loch Seaforth. There's a road that winds its way all the way around there, all around the inlet, and that presumably takes you back over the hills. In fact it does, because I can see it back down to the coast somewhere on the other side of Tarbert. Tarbert was an interesting place. It was like a metropolis after all the little places I've visited so far on this Hebridean journey. But a smart little place as well, and they're investing a lot of money in the ferry terminal there. They're in effect completely rebuilding it. But so far it's been a pretty magnificent day. And I bumped into a couple, well, he was Irish, she was Scottish, at a filling station where I'd stopped to ask some water for my bottles, and I was chatting to them. They avoided talking about the steepness of the hill, thank goodness, because it was just before the hill started. They were kind of working their way around the coast and bits and pieces. But they did say that they'd been to the campsite a little bit further to the north than Callanish. And it did get me thinking that perhaps what I should do is do in effect what I did over the last couple of days, push on to that campsite while the weather is decent like it is today, and then tomorrow come back and visit Callanish and make the most of having a bit more time to do so. I may well do that and stay 2 nights in the campsite, and then, what day is it today? Monday? That would be Monday, Tuesday, and then on Wednesday push on to the final destination of the Butt of Lewis. Right, well, this must sound like a motorway compared to everything else which has so far been recorded over the course of this trip, and it is a bit like a motorway. Everything is comparative, of course, but there's a constant stream of traffic, and I'll be glad to perhaps come off this hill and get back onto the quieter roads, although I dare say that in the direction of Callanish, which is probably the biggest tourist destination of the whole of the Outer Hebrides, there may well be a fair bit of traffic on the way. Bloody tourists, eh? Just entered into the final island, Lewis, although the definition of Lewis and Harris as individual islands is a bit dubious. But I've just passed a sign which says welcome to Lewis, so it's the final island. I've lost count, I think it might be 10, but it could be 8 or 7 or 9. Anyway, the news is I've just seen, excuse me a second, that was a cattle grid. I've just seen 2 eagles, I think. I pulled across to a parking place on the side of the road just to have a stare, and I followed one of them. The other one had disappeared, but initially they both flew over me, and I thought, they're very big birds, so I stopped and had a look, and yeah, definitely an eagle flying over Loch Seaforth. And if I look at my map, my Hebridean Way map, it does actually have an eagle on it. Presumably that's where these eagles nest. Fantastic sight in a fantastic landscape. I have reached my destination. Penultimate day of the Hebridean Trail. Flying the Union Jack.
Hiya.
Hello.
How are you? I hope you're booked.
Yeah, I phoned earlier. I spoke to
Yes.
presumably you.
Yes, it was me.
Yeah, Andrew.
Sykes.
Hi.
Yes. But if you're not booked, oh dear. So if you just want to put your bike there and come in and we'll check you in.
Yeah, I'll put my mask on.
Yes, that's fine. Right.
It's very luxurious.
What's that?
It's very luxurious.
Oh, that's because I refuse to go anywhere else. Down. Ian, there's the phone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hotline. Hi, good evening.
Have you got you come far today?
I've come, a fair distance. I've just knocked up 103 kilometres.
Oh, how's the love?
So I came from the west coast of Harris.
Oh, Horrigabost.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's been a beautiful ride.
Yes.
It's an amazing ride.
Yes.
It's just over the mountains. It's
I
fantastic.
know. Oh, good
Right,
for you.
That's me. Okay.
And you're cycling.
Yeah, my bicycle. She's called Wanda.
Wanda, very good, very good. She's reliable anyway.
Yeah.
She's taking you all that way.
Yeah, and she's COVID compliant.
Oh, very good. As we all are.
Doesn't need a vaccination. So.
Oh, you know. Okay, Andrew, this building here houses 3 ensuite showrooms.
Perfect.
The door at the end and 2 at the front.
Okay.
And the shower there is a 50p coin for 4 minutes, and I always have coins.
Okay.
Over in Downing Street we have showers and toilets, and the shower there is a £1 coin for 8 minutes.
Okay, so it depends how dirty you are, I suppose.
Yes.
So £1 there, 50p here.
Yes.
Okay.
And nothing else will do. No 10s, 20s,
Okay.
nothing.
Okay. I'll check whether I think it might be 50p.
I do
coin,
have them
but,
here if you want to change money.
I'll check in a few seconds.
The Wi-Fi password is on the bottom.
Yeah,
of
I can
that.
see that.
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
And we have cooked breakfasts every day at 8:30. If you
Oh,
want a
wow.
cooked breakfast, you phone this number before 7 at night.
I'm going to take a picture of that.
Yeah.
It's now Tuesday. And I am within shouting distance almost of my final destination, which is of course the Butt of Lewis. Stop sniggering at the back. That's where the lighthouse is, at the end of the Hebridean Way, and I should be there in a couple of hours, so probably around midday, 1 o'clock, something like that. I suppose it depends how many times I pause at places like this. I've stopped at a small but modern war memorial dedicated to the people who died in the wars, who came from these islands. Also the people who died on the Isle Lair, I think it's called, which was a ship bringing troops back home, which sank, and I think hundreds were killed. Very tragic story. I was reading about it the other day. But anyway, to catch up, yesterday, a bit of indecision in terms of where I would stop. Certainly wanted to get as far as Callanish, and I did, although I was still unsure when I got there as to where I'd be staying for the night. Ideally, I suppose I would have loved just to stay in Callanish overnight, camping. Wild camping, didn't see many obvious spots. So after a quick walk round the standing stones at Callanish, which are worth visiting, pity all the tourists were there, but hey, I'm a tourist, so I can't complain. They're a striking addition to the landscape. Obviously, they've been there for thousands of years, so they're almost part of the landscape, even though they are man-made of a long time ago. So I pondered there for a while, had a look round. The visitor centre was closed, so wasn't anything really to learn, but it was a place of contemplation, I suppose. And then got back on the bike, or rather, I looked at the camping options further on, and there was a campsite about 20 kilometres further north. There was the campsite at Shawboss, which I knew about anyway, so I phoned ahead and booked a space there. So at the end of the day, I cycled about 103 kilometres, which is probably longer than I anticipated, but bearing in mind the weather yesterday was just gorgeous, perfect for cycling, sunny, warm, and in the evening, after leaving Callanish at about 5 o'clock, it was still beautiful weather, slowly getting cooler, but even so, really nice to cycle in the evening. So actually, to have cycled 100 kilometres on a day like that is, in my book, a good thing. And the campsite was great, friendly little family-run site. But I had a nice chat this morning with the son of the owner, who lived in a little house next to where I was camping, and I was asking him about his accent, because a lot of the people around here, they sound almost Irish, half Scottish, half Irish, and he was saying that when he worked on cruise ships, people used to just assume that he was Irish rather than being Scottish. I suppose the influence of Ireland is strong because we're geographically so close. And the other thing he was talking about, I asked him about, was the land ownership. And I asked him about the land being taken over by community groups from distant landlords. And he said actually he would have preferred if the distant landlords had kept hold of the land, because now it actually makes it quite difficult for people like him to purchase pockets of land. He says that the prices have gone up because the community groups that own the land have to make back the money that they've invested to actually buy the land in the first place, which is an interesting perspective. I think that's a goose flying high above me. And the other thing here is the traffic. And again, you'll have heard it in the last few minutes. Cars whizzing past. Now, again, I had a conversation yesterday way back at Horgabost on the west side of Harris. I had a chat with two women who were cycling from north to south along the Hebridean Way. And they said, oh, watch out for the traffic when you get into Lewis and North Harris. And I kind of dismissed their comments. I thought, oh, you know, it's because you haven't actually cycled further south where it's really quiet. But I can see what they mean, because what's happened now is that the road is almost exclusively a normal road. It's a normal A road. It's not a single track road anymore. The single track roads finished really on that western side of Harris. And they definitely finished by the time I was climbing that hill to come down into Tarbert on the other side of the mountain. And ever since then it's been almost exclusively a normal A road, which obviously the drivers here, like drivers throughout Britain and throughout the world, can be idiotic. Most of them do give a good distance, but they don't slow down. They don't tend to slow down. But so far so good. The other thing to note here is that the midges are out in force for the first time, really. Perhaps that's a reflection of the weather yesterday. With it being warmer, perhaps that encourages the midges to get out and start biting. So I'm actually sitting here at the moment looking like a mourner from a royal funeral. In fact, if I ever get invited to a royal funeral, I'll perhaps keep my veil on my head, because that's what it looks like, this mosquito net. But it does do the business. And in fact, with the exception of my fingers sticking out of my cycling mittens, that's the only bit of me which is exposed to the gnashes of the biting midges that surround me. There was a comical moment yesterday when I stopped just to climb a little hill to look at a monument to people who'd been pushed off the land, I think in the 19th century. And again, a little modern monument. There was a little spiral staircase inside. Climbed to the top. For about 5 seconds, I was engulfed in a mist of midges and what looked to me like flying ants. So I quickly ran back down and got back on the bike and started pedalling pretty quickly in order to get rid of them. That said, as I'm sitting here, I can't actually see any midges, so I might risk it. I might take this head garb off as I cycle the rest of the way up to the butt of Lewis. The landscape around here isn't that inspiring. I suppose the main attraction to coming to this part of the world is the fact that you are coming to the end of the Outer Hebrides. Gone are the dramatic mountains, gone are the wide open plains. It's just rolling landscape of crofts, farmland, nothing too special about it, but hopefully it will be special when I reach the end and the butt of Lewis. Stop sniggering. Hi.
Drove by, never stopped, had a right look.
Are you a local?
No, just up. The wife's from here, so come up and see her father. So.
Well, apparently it's a whalebone arch.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Found on the beach in 1920. Villagers didn't know what to do with it.
Uh-huh.
And then the Murdo Morrison, and he took it home, made an arch over his gateway It is home Lakefield, which I presume is... Oh, there it is, Lakefield. It's
Yeah,
on the front of
yeah.
there. So there you go. It's quite an impressive thing, isn't it?
It is.
Almost looks like... It doesn't look actually real. It looks almost like, I don't know, something you might find in Disneyland, made out of plaster of Paris.
Plaster of Paris, but I think it's had a covering, but that'll be sort of protected.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
As I say, I drove past a few signs that never... I'm cycling there and I'm going, I'm in no hurry to get back. It's up in here, right, look.
25 feet tall and 4 tons. No one knows where the whale was harpooned or by whom.
No.
Oh, you've got copies of the...
Sorry, sir.
I was tempted to read one of Peter May's books before I came here.
Okay.
Have you read them?
I haven't read them. My son read the novels. Well, he read Black House and The Lewis Man, the second one. But he found them rather dark. He loves reading. He reads anything and everything.
Yeah.
And he just found them a bit dark. But they certainly stir your interest in the place. There's no doubt about it. We've had a lot of custom because of just people wanting to come and see what a Black House was like. Never mind buying anything.
Yeah.
Because of
yeah.
reading the books.
Yeah, perhaps when I get back to England, I'll look him up and have a read.
I think the tourist office in Stornoway has a little brochure, and it's the Peter May Trail.
Yeah, right.
So you can follow different parts of the island, go to different parts of the island, and you find the site of the building, or where he mentions it in the novel.
Yeah, right.
So that's just what we do. There we go. I'll explain to you the layout. We've got 4 buildings. This is building number 1,
Okay.
with the information at the back of the room.
Okay.
There's none in the other buildings. So if you're really interested, that captures your imagination. We do have a guidebook as an optional extra that has
Okay.
lore and social history.
Okay.
Then we've got the main house beside us, and you just follow the path down the left side of the yard.
Yeah.
Work your way through the building. The 2 roofs are one building.
Okay.
There's a real fire on in the living room.
Ooh.
Peat fire. Most people have no problems with it. They enjoy it. It really, in my opinion, adds to the atmosphere of the place. Then out the doorway on the roadside, across the road, there's a ruined black house without a roof. That has one entrance.
Yeah.
Slightly different layout to this one. And then finally the small cottage with the yellow door. You can go inside. And that's the first of our mainland style houses. So it gives a bit of variety of architecture. You can see
Okay.
how people might move from one style to the next.
Okay. And when were the black houses last inhabited?
This one, the one across the road in the 1920s, and they moved into that little cottage. This one was much later, 1960s, and they moved into here.
Oh, right.
So it's quite a recent history. In fact, one of the girls who was born and brought up there still lives in the village.
And has it been renovated to kind of look as it did in the way
Yes,
distant past?
Historic Scotland, well, what was known then in the 60s as the Department of Works, UK-wide, they took on the care of the house as the family moved out.
Yeah.
Had to do some repairs, part of the roof over the bar had collapsed. And over the years they've replaced various roof timbers. Some of the outside walls have been rebuilt with the stone that was there originally. So it's the original house. It has had repairs, and we've managed to keep it going these 55 years.
Okay.
Various rethatch and so on. But it's so good. The mother of the family became the first custodian. Then this daughter, who still lives in the village, was the next up until about 15 years ago. So it's had that personal link all the way through, and it was never abandoned.
And when they lived in there, you know, in the 50s and the 60s, did they, for example, did they have a fitted kitchen? Did they have electricity? Did they have?
The way we have it is it's set up sort of 1930s to 50s. They had electricity. There's no running water. You'll see from the model how basic it is. The fire's on the floor in the hearth in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
And even the cottage across the road, built in the 20s, there's no running water or toilet facilities. They had electricity again, not till the 50s. Running water came here in the 70s, so it was never added to these buildings.
And when was it originally constructed for the first time?
That house in the 1870s.
Okay.
The design, though, goes back to the Norse period, the longhouse idea.
Yeah.
So just a safety warning as well, because of the nature of the doorways, they're low, and and the walls are very thick,
Yeah.
so don't stand up straight too soon. That is,
Well, I'm not very tall. So.
yeah, it's what catches people out is standing up straight too soon.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the doorways are.
Right, brilliant. Okay, I'll have a look around here and then I'll pop
Very
over
good.
there.
Enjoy
Okay.
that. So any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm making my way into the Black House itself. I'm surprised it was only built in 1870. I associate them with being a lot older than that, but clearly not. There's a pile of peat outside. You can smell it. That's a really nice smell. Or perhaps that's the peat burning inside. I think it might be. Not very environmentally friendly, but hey, we'll skip over that. There's a fantastic smell the moment you come inside of the peat fire, which apparently is still kept alight next door. I think we're in the animal bit at the moment. Very blackened interior, wood framed roof. From the model inside, extremely well insulated with earth between the inner and the outer walls. You can see how this would be nice and snug in the middle of winter, especially with all the animals inside, because they would obviously create heat themselves. Right, this is the main living area. Whoa, this is nice and snug. And there's a roaring peat fire on the floor. God, I could have done with that last night at the campsite. In fact, I could do with that every night. Some traditional furniture. Can't imagine the beds were that comfortable. But the whole place is filled with smoke, lingering in the air. Can't have been great if you're asthmatic. And then some small beds. I'm guessing the people back then were a bit shorter than they are now. I'm not exactly tall, but I think I would struggle to fit in those beds. Dressed with curtains. This is not the Stone Age, this is kind of 19th, early 20th century living. A bit like a bothy, perhaps. Albeit a bothy without loads of cans of beers. I'm making very slow progress here to the Butt of Lewis, because every few hundred metres there seems to be an attraction to visit. The whalebone, then the little modern museum with accommodation, maybe back there tonight actually, and now this Black House. That's actually quite a memorable moment, going into that Black House and smelling those smells and feeling that warmth. Gives you a sense of what it would have been like to live here, well, before the modern age. 50, 60, 70, 100, 200 years ago. A fairly inhospitable place, I would imagine. So you can see why they would need a place like that in which to live. Insulated, warm, secure. I have to say this 1920s house is far less cosy than the Black House. A bit less smoky, more modern, but I don't know, I think I'd rather spend the night in the Black House. Certainly a bit warmer, less drafty. Just have to put up with all that smoke. Yeah, this is definitely reminding me of pictures that I've seen of the war, rationing, austerity. But there's certainly one essential ingredient on the chest of drawers, and that's a bottle of Ballantine's finest Scotch whisky. I've wanted to do this since I've arrived. Perhaps you can hear, it's a bit echoey. I'm standing in a Outer Hebrides bush shelter. I don't know why I've wanted to do that since I arrived, but there we go. I'm now doing it, and I'm doing it at the junction where if you turn right, you go to Stornoway, and if you turn left, you go to the Port of Ness, which is the place where you find the Butt of Lewis, and crucially the end of the Hebridean Way. Now, it's only 30 kilometres from here to the Port of Ness, and in the last 10 kilometres since leaving the campsite I must have stopped 4 or 5 times at various attractions. However, I do need to crack on and get to the end of the line in terms of the Hebridean Way fairly soon, because it's now midday, and I want to have a few options when I get there, whether to stay there overnight or come back. Now, I'm not going to be stopped by any attractions between now and the Butt of Lewis, because I know that I'm going to be revisiting this particular stretch of the route either later today or tomorrow, depending upon where I spend the night. Okay? So, from the bush shelter at the junction between the A857 and the A858, with in the background some music, somebody strimming, doing their gardening. The next time I speak to you should be somewhere near the Port of Ness and near the end of the Hebridean Way.
The same bit of road.
Just past Kemping Bowling,
It's like
past
a
the
sand
football
dune.
field, the sand dunes, and there's a...
You turn left and it's a children's play park, just keep going, and there was quite a few people camped just at the side. Beautiful, beautiful beach. And there was somebody this morning collecting water. We didn't collect water, so it might be fresh water, I don't know.
So on the road that goes down to the lighthouse,
Mm-hmm.
on the dunes, obviously on the right, won't it, at that point?
Left.
On the left.
For you, if you're
On the
going
left.
to the lighthouse, you go down the road, past the football field, and the road goes up.
Football field, play park, road goes up and around
The
there.
road goes up to the lighthouse, and then if you can, it's just there.
Right.
It's a beautiful beach. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant, thank
Are
you.
you camping as well?
Yeah. Are you just setting off?
Yeah, we've just done it. We did
right,
south
okay.
to north.
Yeah.
So we did it yesterday, and then we tried to find somewhere to stay, but we couldn't find anywhere, so wild camped again.
Have you found accommodation fairly difficult? Yeah.
And also not nowhere, because we were like, set up for wild camping, but there's like everything's fenced. So we couldn't.
I thought of wild camping last night at Killanish, but again, you look around, you think, well, it all looks fenced up.
We did do it there, but we tucked behind the visitor centre because it was a Sunday night and it didn't open on Monday, so we thought.
Yeah, good thinking.
So we tucked ourselves away, but if it had been a Monday night, I guess we might not have been able to do that.
Yeah,
Tuesday. And but we met some other people. There's 5 of them, and they were camped in Killanish, but sort of down by the sea because they were wild swimming and stuff. But that was really good campsite, really nice. And we did just pass the.
No, it wasn't a campsite. It's just
Sorry, a camping place.
Yeah.
But I forget what that. On the way, we were almost there, and on the left-hand side,
community cafe.
there was like a community cafe. Although they were closed today from 11 till 2, but they refilled our water bottles, and we've been there this morning.
When you turn off from the lighthouse, Wobbly Dog Cafe is there, and then
That's very good.
But where the petrol station is, that's
your last shop.
Last shop.
Okay, brilliant. That's really useful to know, thank you. Hi. I see that the cafe is closed. But there's a museum as
There's a
well.
museum as well, which is quite interesting.
What's the theme of the museum?
Behind me, this room here, it's Guga Hunters. Have you heard of the Guga Hunters? The Gannets?
No.
The men who go out to the island of Solishgil. Get a few hundred of the young gannets out, this year's young gannets.
Uh-huh. It's quite a modern little museum. And telling the story of the people who go out to the islands to cull the gannets and bring them back. Seems quite a barbaric thing, but I suppose it's done for good reasons, just to keep the numbers down. And presumably it's also a tradition.
Hi, the camp's open now.
Thank you. The culling of the gulls,
Of the gannets.
gannets, sorry, is it done to keep the numbers down, or is it something that's been a tradition for a long time?
It's been a tradition for hundreds of years, but 500 years, quite specific to this area.
Right.
Because very much like the St Kildans, they needed food over the winter months, and so they were required to expand their horizons and find gannets. And in those days it was a survival of the fittest, survival. They would salt the meat and have it as food over the winter. The tradition continues, because it's a source of income. The men who go, and they're there right now, after a break last year, for the first time since the war, since the Second World War, but they're there at the moment, and they take 2 weeks off work, possibly 3 weeks off work, and they sell the gannets. They have a strict quota, so when they land the 1,500 at Stornwood Pier, there is someone counting to make sure they don't exceed the quota. The gannets are then divided between each crew member, and they have their own customers. It's not sold in the shops, but they have their own list of customers, and I think the last time they were selling for 16 or 17 pounds.
And what does it taste like? Have you tasted it?
Yes, many times growing up, every year growing up. It looks like goose, dark meat. There's not much meat on the bones, but there's a thick skin of blubber, grey, the sort of stubble. Doesn't sound very attractive. The meat itself is very fishy and salty. The texture and look of goose. The taste of tuna. That's about it. But I think that the men who go, it's not just to make money for the 2 weeks, but they want to keep the tradition alive.
Interesting. You don't sell it in the cafe?
No, no.
Thank you. I've just crested a little hill on the road to the Port of Ness, and for the first time I've seen the lighthouse at the Butt of Lewis. So only a few kilometres to go on this quest to cycle the length of the Hebridean Way. Some idiot drivers on the road in Subarus, as you can hear, but nearly there. After over 400 kilometres since leaving home, that's 400 kilometres cycling, lots more on trains and bits and pieces, but I would say probably about 350 of those, if not more, on the Outer Hebrides themselves. I'm finally within shouting distance of the end. Should be there before 2 o'clock. The landscape this morning has been fairly nondescript, just farmland really. Certainly nothing as spectacular as elsewhere on the Outer Hebrides. But here there's finally something of interest. These are peat bogs, and you can clearly see where the peat has been cut from over the years, the decades, probably the centuries, and is continuing to be cut. I've regularly passed this morning gardens with neat stacks of peat all ready for burning on the fire. Not very popular with the environmentalists, but hey, if you live on the Outer Hebrides and you haven't got any wood to burn and they haven't sent a gas pipe along your bit of the world, then you can understand why they still dig it up and burn it.
Meet the bottom of it, are you? Heading for the lighthouse?
Well, yeah, I'm heading for the lighthouse, and hopefully I'm just going to camp on the by the beach up there.
Oh yeah, there's a nice wee store, there's a nice wee beach too.
Yeah, well, I've met a few cyclists coming in the other direction who were there last night, and the weather's looking fairly good.
I think we're settled till Friday, so you know, 2 nights, never mind one, have 2 nights.
Well, I've got as soon as you're, what was it again? Britain's most
northwesterly shop.
There you go. You should have that written outside on your sign.
We'll just ignore it like everything else.
Back in the 70s, you'd have Norris McWhirter.
Yeah.
Right, I've come in for some tomato sauce.
Dead ahead, top shelf. So is it cheese you're looking for?
Cheese and shortbread.
Right.
Do you do any shortbread?
Well, we're in short supply with shortbread, I'm afraid.
It's Scotland. You should have.
We should have, yeah. We're waiting on an order coming this afternoon.
Yeah, right.
But the cheese is in the chiller there.
Okay, I'll grab the cheese in a second. Oh, and would you believe it? Just before you get to the end, there's another little steep hill that you've got to climb. Bit of a kick in the teeth. Now I can see a sign ahead, a blue sign that I've been following for the last week and a day, and oh no, it doesn't say Hebridean Way. It says something completely different. So should I continue or should I turn left? I'm going to continue straight on. As presumably, there is a sign. So the Port of Ness is down there. I'm going to turn left. And as I do so, immediately the wind changes, sharp left turn. And well, that's quite a different scene actually. It's quite a spread out settlement. If you want a big garden, come and live in a place like this. Because there are, well, I think somebody earlier in the day told me that there were 2,000 people. The chap back at the Black House said there were 2,000 people living here. And you can see why. It's 2,000 people isn't a lot, but it's certainly spread out, and there's a string of houses all the way in the direction of the lighthouse that I think I can still see. I think that's a lighthouse. Looks like a chimney popping up above the edge of the hill, and it's on those hills that presumably I'm going to camp tonight. Did see one cyclist just as I was coming out of the petrol station stroke Britain's most northwesterly shop. I think it was a female. She looked as though she was on her own. She was presumably heading in the same direction as me, so I might not be alone camping out tonight. The weather has turned for the better. It's well, to my left all I can see is blue sky. Wow. And to my right, well, there's a bank of light cloud. But I did check on the weather radar when I was in the little community cafe, and it did look as though most of the Outer Hebrides didn't have any cloud over it. So Couldn't quite tell whether it was moving in the direction of elsewhere or coming from the north to cover the Outer Hebrides. I'm suspecting the former, because it's certainly brightening up, and this is a lot sunnier and warmer than it was earlier. And I've arrived, and it's quite a spectacular spot, especially under a bright blue sky in bright sunshine. The brick edifice of the lighthouse itself stands proud above some pretty spectacular cliffs. Not the biggest cliffs in the world, but in terms of their geographical, geological formation, they're just incredible. Look at those bends and turns and layers, and they're home, as you can imagine, to hundreds, probably thousands of birds. I have to say, of all the ends of journeys that I've managed to knock up over the last 10 years, more than 10 years on the bike, Brindisi, Cape St Vincent in Portugal, even Nordkapp in Norway, this has to be up there with the best of them, because not only is it spectacular, but it's not overrun with tourists, and the weather's playing a part as well, it being such a beautiful afternoon. Truly spectacular. You really wouldn't think you're in the northwestern corner of Britain, certainly the northwestern corner of the Outer Hebrides, one of the most remote places in Britain. Yet it's like a summer's day in Brighton without the crowds or the ice cream. It's also quite refreshing that, despite the fact that this is a tourist spot, the edges of the cliffs haven't been fenced off. In fact, there isn't even a warning sign saying do not approach the edge of this cliff. I suppose it's a case of the buyer beware. If you get close to the edge, you may fall off. All that remains for today is to find somewhere to camp. Just listen to that, the crash of waves against the beach here at the Butt of Lewis. Well, near the Butt of Lewis. I found a beach and I'm wild camping on a bit of grass that's just above the beach. I'm not alone. There are other wild campers around, although not quite as close as they were back in Vatersay a week and a bit ago. So this is more wild camping than perhaps it was back then. I'm well fed, I'm well watered, and I've achieved my objective. I've got to the Butt of Lewis, and I'm doing some real wild camping. Can't say I'm 100% comfortable about the whole wild camping thing, but hey, some wine and a bit of whiskey helps. Let's see if I sleep any better tonight than I normally do. I think I prefer this sound to the sound of snoring and farting and other human noises that you get on a campsite. I did sleep in my wild camping spot for a few hours. There were a few of the tents actually around over the little dune and around the bay. I saw them when I went for a paddle in the sea this morning at 6 o'clock. Just have a quick wash. It's quite invigorating. Never done that before. I feel just as fresh now as I do normally when I've had a shower in a campsite or even at home. So there you go. Top tip, if you're next to the sea, go for a wash in the sea. And it tastes nice. Nice salty taste on the lips. Came back to the tent with the plan of having a leisurely coffee and then packing up and heading off. And I dare say I would have been heading off by about 8, 8:30. The clue as to why I'm no longer in my tent and I'm now behind a barbed wire fence is the moo that you just heard. In the distance you should still hear the sea, but you'll also hear a few moos, because when I opened the flap of my tent, after thinking about my coffee, I could see a small herd of very black cows. And although I live in a house next to a field full of Frisian cows, at home I don't necessarily want to be sharing my tent space with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16. Goodness me, 16 black cows of varying sizes, including some very small ones and what look like some mothers. And you don't want to start messing with the calves of mothers of any species, let alone a cow, which can quite easily trample not just your tent, but you as well. So anyway, I've packed up many times in the past, probably hundreds of times in a tent, but I don't think I've ever packed up so quickly as I did on the morning of the 25th of August 2021, courtesy of the arrival in my wild camping spot of a herd of cows. At least they're not bulls, I think. Anyway, all that aside, my journey along the Hebridean Way is now complete. The journey to the Outer Hebrides is far from complete, however, because I still need to travel back to Stornoway, then back to the mainland at Ullapool, and then fathom a route by train back down to Halifax. Now, last night, when I managed to get a bit of internet connection here, it's not brilliant where I was camping, but I did manage to get a bit of connection, and I booked myself the ferry across, £10 to get from Stornoway down to Ullapool. I also booked a night tonight at the campsite in Stornoway. I've also booked a night at a campsite near Ullapool when I get over there. So for the next couple of days I've got nothing to worry about in terms of the logistics. It's just the cycling. Stornoway should be an interesting place to visit. I've never been there before. Ullapool, well, I'm going to be arriving quite late in Ullapool, late afternoon anyway. Find the campsite, and then there's one of the Cycle Touring Festival talks by Tim Sanders, who's going to be talking about his trip to South America about 18 months ago. So that should be interesting. I just hope I get a sufficient connection on the 4G in order to be able to tune into that Zoom event. And then, I think the next challenge is going to be getting the train from Garve, which itself is a cycle away from Ullapool, back down to Halifax. As soon as I'm in Glasgow, I'll be okay, I think, because I'll just jump on one of those Transpennine trains again. They have plenty of space for bikes. But getting from Garve to Inverness and then back down to Glasgow, people have told me it can be a challenge. So, that is to come. But for the time being, I'm going to set off very early, 7:30, and start cycling in the direction of Stornoway. Cows are far more friendly when they're a couple of metres away, but behind a barbed wire fence. You made me get out of my tent, matey. You're more interested in your greens, aren't you? And that was the story of my cycle along the Hebridean Way. But we haven't quite finished. Keep listening if you want to find out more about my journey from the Butt of Lewis back home to Yorkshire. That's coming up in a few moments. At 6 p.m. on Sunday the 26th of September 2021, I'll be publishing a 40-minute film about my cycle along the Hebridean Way. The film is called The Outer Hebrides on a bike called Wanda, and there's a special premiere event at 6 p.m. on the 26th, and you can find out more details about that by visiting my YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/Andrew P. Sykes. Obviously, if you're listening to this after the 26th of September, the film will still be there for you, hopefully, to enjoy. If you're listening to this before 8 p.m. on Thursday the 30th of September 2021 and haven't decided to go and see the new James Bond film, which is finally being released on that day, you can join me when I give the monthly online talk for the Cycle Touring Festival about my cycle along the Hebridean Way. All the details can be found at cycletouringfestival.co.uk. Remember that if you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please consider taking a few moments to rate or even review the Cycling Europe podcast on the platform where you're listening. Remember that you can now also support the website and the podcast by visiting cyclingeurope.org/support. And a big thank you if you choose to do so. Finally, if you'd like to get in touch with your own cycle touring story with a view to perhaps appearing in a future episode, you can contact me by emailing podcast@cyclingeurope.org, or you'll find me across social media at Cycling Europe. So for those of you who are still listening, an extra bit of cycle touring. Sit back and enjoy the very final part of my journey from the northern tip of the Isle of Lewis back to Glasgow via Stornoway, Ullapool, Garve and Inverness. Thanks for listening and happy cycling. After yesterday's incident with the cows on the wild camping spot, which was a fantastic place to camp, oh, what a nice refreshing way to start the day it was in the sea, although I did feel horrendously grubby not long after. Ugh. Anyway, that really was the highlight of yesterday, because the rest of the day, after a short visit to the port of Ness, was just really the trudge backwards, first of all along the road that I'd cycled upon the previous day to the port of Ness, to the Butt of Lewis, and then it was sunshine in and I had the prospect of arriving at my final destination in mind. Yesterday it was kind of after the event in the opposite direction, and the weather wasn't great, a bit drizzly, quite cold, and my goodness, whatever benefits Lewis does have in terms of its history, in terms of its culture, in terms of its coastline, certainly at the Butt of Lewis, its interior is just basically one big peat bog, and it doesn't make for the most inspiring of cycling. I turned left to head towards Stornoway after about a couple of hours of cycling. Was refused water at the petrol station there, which was a bit of a disappointment, because then I had to kind of struggle. There really wasn't anything between the petrol station and arriving in Stornoway in terms of houses, in terms certainly no businesses, certainly nowhere to stop and ask if they had a tap. So that was a bit annoying. I got a nice reaction on Twitter, but eventually started to descend and came down into Stornoway. And the campsite here is fantastic. It's like a continental campsite. Loads of space for tents on a free camping area. Great facilities. So I spent a couple of hours then washing my clothes, brushing out the tent, drying the tent, sorting out my gear. So I do feel as though, although we've only got another 2 days, probably 3 max, before I get home, at least I can do it in clothes which are not reeking of 8 days worth of toil and sweat and grime and goodness knows what else. Later in the day yesterday I did pop down to Stornoway. I bumped into a chap called John France who he'd commented a few times on Twitter and he's commented on the website. I actually met him way back in 2014, he said, when I was previously cycling around the coast of North and West Scotland. I can't remember that, but, well, we must have met. And I went for a beer with him, which was quite nice. But shortly before that, I just paid a quick visit to the castle. Now, the castle is some baronial mansion built by the previous landlords of the area, who weren't very well thought of. But it's now been converted and renovated. And there's a museum just to the side, a brand new museum. I've booked myself in for this morning. So the first thing I'm going to do today, I'm not going to bother with coffee or breakfast at the tent. I'm just going to pack up here. I'm going to head down into Stornoway, which is only about 10 minutes away on the bike. I'm going to grab myself coffee, perhaps a bit of breakfast in the centre, and then at 10 o'clock I'm going to rock up at the gates of what looked like a really excellent museum to have a look around there. And then at 1:30 I've got to be at the ferry port in order to get the ferry back to the mainland and to Ullapool. So that's the plan for today. The weather, well, still looking a bit like yesterday, although there is a glimmer of hope in the east, a slither of brightness. So whether that will move in this direction, I hope so, but for a fair amount of today I'm going to be stuck in a ferry. And then the campsite in Ullapool. So I could do with some decent weather just to hopefully enjoy my final night of camping before the long struggle of getting back to West Yorkshire on the train, which could be fun. But anyway, onwards. Morning. I've got a booking for 10 o'clock this morning.
And what was the name, please?
Andrew Sykes.
Yes, the telephone booking list today.
What comes with the wind will go with the rain.
If they use geleerd, zijn er toch een hikkels in de splutter in de aarde, spalla voor geles. En je kan ook nog trots de stubbers, ja. Maar dan gaan er meer aan zijn, dan ik na hikkels koelie gele. Zijn bij gaan er hier toch aan hikkels.
What's the correct pronunciation of that? Maca.
Yeah,
Right, the Lewis chessmen. The Lewis chessmen were found in a sand dune in Uig, on the west coast of Lewis, either in Melista or Ardroyle. They were probably hidden in a small chamber. There are many local stories, but it's a mystery who found the chessmen and exactly when. We do know that they were on display in Edinburgh on the 11th of April 1831. There are 93 chess pieces from 4 sets, although some are missing. 11 are in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, and 82 are in the British Museum in London. The chess pieces consist of finely worked walrus ivory and whale teeth. The detail in each one shows how skilled the craftsmen were. Yeah, the Lewis chessmen were probably made by 5 different craftsmen in a workshop in Trondheim, Norway, more than 800 years ago. Why did the British Museum only lend you 6 rather than perhaps a complete set?
I think it's probably to do with insurance. Yeah, I'd say it was something like that.
Seems it says here there are 4 sets.
Yes.
Some are missing. It seems a shame that you don't have a complete set to look at.
Yeah, I think they're worth a lot of money. I think that it's just to do with what we can manage here. So, but I think they're on loan to us for 10 years, so that's up in 2026.
Yeah.
So we might be able to swap around the pieces that we already have and then get a new loan, and then so we can probably change up the pieces we've got, which will be nice.
Yeah. It's not as if anybody can nick them and turn up at the antiques roadshow and get them valued.
No, definitely.
They're fairly unique.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there was that one piece that was found in Edinburgh a couple of years ago. That was. Did you hear about that? No, that was. Someone came forward and said that their father, I think, was it their grandfather, was an antiques dealer, and they found in their cupboard a chess piece, and they said, "Oh, I've got this chess piece. He must have bought it in the 60s," and it turned out that they found out he bought it for £5 or something in the 60s, and she'd just had it sitting in a cupboard till 2019, I think it was, and it got bought up by a private buyer, so I think it sold for nearly £800,000.
And was it bought by the British Museum?
No, private buyer.
So it's still out there as a private?
Yeah, we don't know whose it is, so yeah, somebody's got it in their own personal collection, so yeah.
Is there any mention of the Isle Air disaster?
We had an exhibition, so the end room that's down there for about a couple of months. We had a really nice exhibition about it. Unfortunately, the only few things, so the bell there is from Isle Air.
Oh right,
there's only a few other wee things, like the gentleman I think on the left, he was a man who managed to get a rope from the boat to the shore, and he saved a number of lives. And the guy on the right is one of the men he saved.
Quick catch up on what's happened over the last 24 hours. I left Berneray on the ferry after an excellent visit to that museum that you've just heard. Fantastic place, very modern, and tells the story of the Outer Hebrides really well. And I'm glad actually that I'd cycled along the Hebridean Way before visiting that museum, because it put the whole thing into context, and you were able to really understand more of what was there than if I'd done it, say, in the opposite direction, north to south, and visited the museum before actually travelling through the island. So there you go, top tip. It's not just the wind, it's that museum in Berneray that's well worth a visit, next to Lewes Castle. Now, yesterday evening I did manage to get a 4G signal at the campsite in Ullapool. That was a little bit of a climb up a hill after getting off the ferry. Nice location for the campsite, although my pitch was a bit away from the shore. I had a nice chat with a Dutch cyclist who was heading off around the coast of Scotland. In fact, no, he had been going around the coast of Scotland, but he was about to jump on the ferry, and I saw him again this morning for a quick catch-up. This morning, retraced my steps back into Ullapool. I'm now on my way home, and there were a couple of options. Somebody did talk about a bus, apparently, that goes from Ullapool to Inverness that you can catch, and you can put your bike on it, apparently. But it's a beautiful day, blue sky, warm temperatures, the wind is quite low, and it's not a day to be stuck on a bus. So what I'm doing is actually, having retraced my steps from yesterday afternoon back down into Ullapool, I'm now retracing my steps from Ullapool to Garve. Now, I did this particular ride, it's about 50 kilometres, back in 2014, a very wet August cycle around the north coast and then the west coast of Scotland, and I've actually stopped at the same place that I stopped way back in 2014, 7 years ago. Now, back in 2014, I remember very, very little of this ride, this particular section from Ullapool to Garve. But the one bit I do remember is standing in more or less exactly the same spot as I am now, feeling a bit miserable because it was a bit of a steep hill. Well, that hasn't changed. I've just done a very steep hill. but also the weather was really dodgy, and I think after, it must have been a week, 10 days on the bike of getting wet almost every day, I was just a bit downbeat about the whole thing. Here I am again, and it couldn't be more different. The weather, fantastic for the last few days, looks as though it's going to continue hopefully for a couple more days as I make my way back down to, well, Inverness to begin with. That's probably up a bit, and then down to Glasgow. The big potential spanner in the wheel here could be getting my bike onto the train at Garve. Wasn't a problem back in 2014, but then I headed in the opposite direction towards Skye. Haven't completely discounted doing that again, retracing my steps across Skye, ferry to Mallaig, and then just one train, Mallaig down to Glasgow. Would that work? Not sure. Anyway, let's stick to plan A, which is Inverness and then Glasgow. Let's see how that goes this afternoon. If it goes as smoothly as the train journey up here, I'll be very pleased. And the other thing that I'm very pleased about is the fact that the North Coast 500... Now, again, thinking back to 2014, I don't know whether the North Coast 500 was something that had either been invented or was something that I was aware of. I must have followed most of its route by cycling along the north coast and then the west coast of Scotland. But I am aware of it now. I'm aware of the issues with motorhomes, with motorbikes, and a lot of those were on the campsite last night, and a lot of them were zooming past yesterday evening and this morning. And a lot of them have been passing me, in fairness, giving me plenty of room, being patient, etc. this morning, so credit where credit's due. But I will be glad in a few moments when the North Coast 500 actually turns right and heads along the coast, whereas I continue along this main road, this A road, which will eventually get me down to Garve in about another 25-30 kilometres. And there, the train fun starts. But it was a nice long cycle in the sun. But the descent into Garve, which is very long, quite a bit of it was against the gentle wind. Not a very strong wind, but it doesn't take much wind to make it an effort to cycle on those gradual gradients downhill. Anyway, now in Garve, minor incident on the road, minor for me, not so minor for the people concerned and their lorry and their van respectively. Coming round a corner, I could see the cab of the lorry. Fortunately it wasn't a full lorry, it was just a cab, not carrying any load. It was a double solid white line in the middle of the road around the curve, as it would be, to stop overtaking. Could hear the van approaching from behind me. I put out my right hand in order just to warn them that there was something coming around the corner. The next thing I heard was a screech of brakes and a bang. I looked around and I could see that the van behind me had been pushed to one side and was trying to realign itself with the road. Anyway, it did overtake me, and the lorry or the cab continued in the other direction. I thought that was it, and I was a bit curious as to where the bang had come from, what had actually connected with what. There was a highways maintenance van just behind, and he picked up a little bit of debris from the road and pushed it to the one side, and I thought that was that. But they both stopped, both the cab driver who turned round and come back down, and the van driver, a woman from Germany I think, had stopped a little bit further on, and she was quite upset about the whole thing. That was okay, because I was on solid ground in terms of, hey, you know, you should be slowing down, certainly not thinking of crossing that double white line in the middle of the road. Anyway, gave my details and made it down to Garve a few kilometres later, thank goodness. Bought my ticket, thank goodness. There's no mobile signal here, but I managed to get onto a Wi-Fi connection, courtesy of one of the houses. So I bought my ticket, but the question is, will I get back to Glasgow tonight? Or will it be Inverness? Will my bike be allowed on the train to Inverness? That's the next question. The train is due in about 20 minutes, I think, so I'm about to find out. Well, I'm on the train from Garve after a little discussion with the very kind, obliging conductor. She let me on despite there already being 4 bikes on the train. So I'm standing here just hoping that when I get to Inverness I can get on a train with the bike to Glasgow and get to Glasgow tonight. That will be excellent.